Imagine standing right in the center of Beijing. I mean, the typically chaotic, gridlocked arteries of the city are just entirely empty.
Right, total lockdown.
Yeah, complete lockdown. And rolling straight down Shannon Avenue into Tiananmen Square is this massive, highly armored behemoth of a vehicle. You know, the Beast.
Yeah.
It's this incredibly stark, almost cinematic visual of the world's two largest superpowers colliding.
It really sets the tone immediately, doesn't it? I mean, we are looking at a hyper-controlled environment where absolutely nothing is left to chance.
Exactly. And welcome to today's deep dive. We are using some fascinating live on-the-ground reporting from Taiwan's Eastern Broadcasting Company as our lens today.
A really unique perspective to have.
It is. We're examining this highly anticipated, really high-stakes summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing. And this is actually their first meeting in the city in 9 years.
Right, a massive gap between visits.
Yeah. So our goal today is to kind of cut through all the pomp and circumstance, the official photo ops, and look at the raw geopolitical leverage at play. We're going to look at the incredibly specific personnel choices and honestly, what this means for your own business supply chains.
Which is what everyone actually cares about.
Exactly. But I have to challenge the premise of these summits right out of the gate here.
Okay, go for it.
We're going to talk a lot today about 21-gun salutes, the specific color of their ties, the military honor guards. But doesn't this all just boil down to domestic theater?
Well,
I mean, are these meticulously choreographed photo ops actually moving the needle on trade policy? Or is this just, red meat for the evening news cycles back home?
it's really tempting to dismiss all that pageantry as just window dressing for the cameras. I totally get that. But in high-stakes diplomacy, the pageantry, it actually is the diplomacy, or at least the initial phase of the negotiation.
Yep.
Well, statecraft relies heavily on precedent and protocol.
Right.
So when a superpower alters the protocol, even slightly, it's a binding diplomatic signal.
Okay.
You're basically broadcasting your negotiating posture before anyone even sits down at the actual table.
So let's look at the posture during that arrival ceremony then. Because Trump's motorcade left the Four Seasons Hotel, moved through what the sources called completely watertight security perimeters, and arrived at the Eastgate Square of the Great Hall of the People.
Yeah, the security was described as drop-proof.
Right. And you've got the 21-gun salute, with Trump actually saluting back, the inspection of the three branches of the military, the welcoming children waving flags. I mean, it is a sensory overload of state power.
It always is.
But the actual greeting on the tarmac featured this major bureaucratic shift. Back in 2017, Trump was greeted by State Councilor Yang Jiechi.
Right.
But this time, Vice President Han Zheng was the one standing on the tarmac.
Which is huge. That shift, going from a state councilor up to the vice president, is a critical escalation.
Because of the hierarchy.
Exactly. The Chinese bureaucratic hierarchy is notoriously rigid, Moving up a tier for the official greeting, that's Beijing telegraphing that the stakes of this specific visit are exponentially higher than they were in 2017.
Okay, that makes sense.
They are essentially validating the gravity of the current trade and security climate right there on the runway.
Yet, and this is the interesting part, despite the higher rank of the greeter, the interpersonal dynamic felt significantly stiffer this time around.
Yeah, it really did.
You had Xi Jinping in a blue suit, Trump in dark navy with the red tie, and it was polite, sure, but nowhere near as relaxed or, chatty as their previous Beijing encounter.
Well, we have to look at the structural changes to the event itself to understand that stiffness.
Right.
Because Melania Trump did not make the trip.
Oh, okay.
And because diplomatic protocol relies on this strict, almost algorithmic mirroring, the absence of the U.S. First Lady meant that China's First Lady, Peng Liyuan, was also absent.
Oh, wow. I guess if you think of high-level diplomacy, like a massive corporate merger, the spouses often act as the shock absorbers.
That is a great way to put it.
They facilitate the softer interpersonal dialogue at the dinners and the receptions. And if you remove them, the entire event just defaults to this naked power projection.
Exactly.
It's literally just rows of men in dark suits and military uniforms staring each other down.
The shock absorber analogy is incredibly accurate here, because without that buffer, the friction is immediate. And when you consider the deeply contentious agenda that was waiting for them inside the Great Hall, a rigid, friction-heavy tone was, well, it was probably inevitable.
Right, and that naked power projection becomes even more apparent when you start looking at the VIP roster. Because the people who actually walk the red carpet give us a very clear diagnostic of where the global economy is heading.
They absolutely do.
And, if you're listening to this and wondering why your own company's supply chain feels so incredibly fragile lately, just look at the sheer size of the U.S. delegation this time.
Yeah, the numbers are telling.
9 years ago, the U.S. brought 29 top-tier business leaders. But this time, The delegation was slashed to just 16.
And a reduction of that scale, that isn't an accident
No.
or a scheduling conflict. A smaller delegation indicates a highly defensive, targeted economic posture.
Okay.
The era of massive, open-ended trade expansion between these two countries is basically over. Now, it's really about protecting very specific, critical bottlenecks.
Which explains exactly who did make the cut. Because you have Elon Musk and Tim Cook sitting right there in the second row.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah. But the most revealing logistical detail from the coverage is about Jensen Huang. He apparently jumped on a plane in Alaska at the absolute last minute just to make this summit.
Yeah, that was a fascinating detail.
I mean, the CEO of NVIDIA doesn't scramble from Alaska unless the stakes are completely existential.
Right. Jensen Huang's presence is, frankly, the physical embodiment of the core conflict here, because NVIDIA dominates the architecture of AI chips.
Right, the brains of it all.
Exactly. His last-minute arrival really highlights how central semiconductor intellectual property has become to national security. The U.S. isn't bringing this sprawling delegation of retail and manufacturing CEOs anymore. They are bringing the actual architects of the future economy.
Wow. We're going to dive into that AI chip leverage in a moment, but I have to pause on the cabinet members who are sitting in the front row.
Okay.
Because you've got Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who rushed over straight from South Korea, by the way,
Right.
and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Yes.
Now, let's look at the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Because Marco Rubio is actively sanctioned by Beijing.
Yes.
He is legally barred from entering the country. So how does the U.S. Secretary of State physically bypass customs and sit inside the Great Hall of the People?
It's wild, right? This is a perfect window into the mechanics of the Chinese bureaucratic state. On paper, that sanction is absolute. But practically, both sides absolutely needed Rubio in that room to conduct the summit. So, according to the sources, Rubio's team reportedly utilized a slight modification of his translated name in Chinese characters on the official documents.
Wait, hold on. So they just introduced a typo to trick the system.
Basically, yeah.
That sounds almost absurd for an event with watertight security.
Yeah.
I mean, does Beijing's intelligence apparatus seriously not know who is standing right in front of them?
Oh, they absolutely know.
Okay, so then why?
But you have to understand how automated enforcement works in a rigid, top-down bureaucracy like China's.
Okay.
The digital customs system is programmed to red flag a very specific arrangement of characters. If a lower-level border official manually overrides a red flag on a sanctioned U.S. official, that local official risks severe career consequences, or even worse.
Oh, I see.
Right. The system just doesn't allow for nuance at that level.
So the modified name is essentially a bureaucratic skeleton key.
Yeah.
It avoids triggering the automated red flag in the first place.
Exactly. It gives the lower-level administrators plausible deniability. The system didn't beep, so they let him through. And it allows the top brass in Beijing to get the U.S. Secretary of State into the room without suffering the domestic humiliation of officially repealing a sanction.
Wow.
It's a technical workaround that preserves the political fiction for both sides.
It is just fascinating that the gears of global diplomacy sometimes require the equivalent of clearing your browser cookies just to function.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So the loophole gets them into the room. The massive wooden doors of the Great Hall finally close. And now they actually have to negotiate.
Right.
And the agenda reported here is staggering. You have the ongoing trade war, the timing and fallout of the Iran war, and of course the most sensitive flashpoint on the globe, Taiwan.
Yeah, the sheer weight of that agenda requires immense leverage. And the standoff happening in that room is essentially a clash over two entirely different types of leverage.
Okay.
China controls the physical materials of the future, while the U.S. controls the intellectual architecture.
So you're talking about rare earth minerals versus AI chips.
Yes, exactly. When we talk about rare earths, I think we often picture someone just digging valuable dirt out of a mine somewhere.
Right, like a gold rush.
Yeah, but the leverage isn't actually the mining. Rare earths are relatively abundant globally. The true bottleneck, the real choke point that China holds, is the refining process.
The refining.
Right, refining rare earths into the magnets and components used in electric vehicles, F-35 fighter jets, iPhones, all of it. It is an incredibly toxic, environmentally devastating, and highly complex chemical process.
And China has spent decades scaling up that specific refining infrastructure, while the rest of the world effectively outsourced all that environmental damage to them.
Exactly. And you cannot just spin up a massive, highly toxic refining industry in the US or Europe overnight. You just can't.
No.
So China holds a near monopoly on the processing capacity. If they throttle exports, Western defense and tech manufacturing just grinds to a halt.
Wow. So Beijing has the physical refining choke point, but the U.S. counters with the intellectual choke point.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to Jensen Huang sitting in the VIP section. Because companies like NVIDIA don't actually fabricate the chips, right?
Oh, they don't.
They design the incredibly complex architecture that makes artificial intelligence possible in the first place.
Precisely. And if the U.S. restricts access to those designs and the high-end chips, China's AI and military modernization just hits a brick wall.
So it's a mutual vulnerability.
It really is. China holds the refined materials the U.S. needs to build the hardware, and the U.S. holds the intellectual property China needs to process the data. Neither superpower can fully build the 21st century economy without the other's compliance.
And what makes this terrifying for the rest of the world is that these two massive economic bottlenecks are being negotiated right alongside security flashpoints.
Yeah.
And this is where the Taiwanese broadcast really changes the context. You can actually hear the tension in their live coverage.
Oh, absolutely.
They are scrutinizing every second of this summit for any hint that Taiwan's security is going to be, traded away for access to rare earth minerals.
And that anxiety is entirely justified based on the history here. The foundation of Taiwan's security relies on something called the Six Assurances.
Right, from the Reagan era.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Established during the Reagan administration, these are really the load-bearing walls of U.S. policy in the region.
Right.
And among other things, they guarantee the U.S. will not set a date for ending arms sales to Taiwan, and crucially, will not consult with Beijing before making those sales.
Because Taiwan's entire defense relies on the porcupine strategy, right?
Yes.
They need a constant influx of high-tech U.S. weaponry, the quills,
Yeah.
essentially, to make an invasion just too costly for Beijing to attempt.
Right. So if Trump and Xi are sitting at that table and Beijing says, look, we will ease export controls on rare earths, but you need to delay or reduce the next package of arms sales to Taiwan, that directly threatens those Six Assurances.
Wow.
Even a really subtle shift in those arms sales dynamically alters the military balance in the Taiwan Strait. That's exactly why Taiwan is watching this meeting with bated breath. They fear becoming just another bargaining chip in a much broader technological trade war.
I mean, if you're listening to this right now and wondering how geopolitical strategy impacts your everyday life, this is it.
This is the moment.
The stability of your retirement portfolio, the cost of the electric vehicle you want to buy next year, the capability of the phone in your pocket. It all hinges on how effectively these two leaders navigate this exact intersection of rare earth refining and semiconductor architecture.
Totally.
But what I find so compelling about this summit is that, after navigating these existential, highly militarized topics inside the Great Hall, the venue just completely shifts.
Yeah, it's quite the pivot.
They leave the boardroom and move straight into the arena of soft power, because the afternoon itinerary features a tour of the Temple of Heaven.
Which is arguably just as critical as the closed-door negotiations.
Really?
Yeah. We mentioned earlier that diplomacy is a broadcast. Well, the Temple of Heaven is the ultimate broadcast of cultural supremacy and, calibrated hospitality.
So Beijing completely locked down the temple to the public 2 days in advance, and that level of security is standard. But the mechanism of the tour itself is what stands out from the reporting.
Right.
Xi Jinping acted as Trump's personal tour guide.
Yes.
And we saw this exact same tactic back in 2017 when Xi personally walked Trump through the Forbidden City.
We did.
So why deploy the leader of 1 billion people and a massive global economy as essentially a museum docent?
Because it is asymmetrical warfare via hospitality.
Wow.
Beijing's intelligence and diplomatic corps have extensively profiled their counterparts, obviously. They know Donald Trump places a huge premium on personal relationships, visible deference, and grand historical aesthetics.
So it's not just about showing off some nice architecture.
Oh, far from it. It's a highly calculated psychological maneuver.
Yeah.
By having Xi Jinping himself guide the tour through the Temple of Heaven, which, by the way, is a site where emperors historically prayed for good harvests, Beijing is creating an atmosphere of peer-level exclusivity. It's a mechanism to flatter the guest, build personal rapport, and soften the adversarial edges of those brutal trade negotiations. You surround your rival with undeniable grandeur and treat them as an imperial equal.
Right.
It creates a psychological debt.
It's the ultimate bespoke VIP treatment designed entirely to extract leverage later.
Exactly.
Leverage the ego to win the trade dispute.
Yeah.
So we have this incredible duality to the summit. Inside the Great Hall, it is a brutal zero-sum standoff over toxic rare earth refining and AI intellectual property.
Right.
And then outside, it is a masterclass in personalized cultural flattery.
And honestly, managing that duality is the essence of modern statecraft. You have to be able to threaten the foundation of a rival's tech sector in the morning and then comfortably walk them through a sacred temple in the afternoon, all without breaking stride.
It is wild. Let's pull all of these threads together because we've covered a lot.
We have.
We started with those surreal, completely locked down streets of Beijing and the highly calibrated arrival ceremony. We saw how the absence of the spouses removed the diplomatic shock absorbers, leaving this stark, friction-heavy environment.
Yep.
We unpacked the bureaucratic gymnastics, literally deliberate translation typos required just to get sanctioned officials like Marco Rubio into the room.
And then we examine the brutal mechanics of the leverage at play once the doors closed.
Right.
China's stranglehold on the highly toxic rare earth refining process matched right up against the U.S. monopoly on AI chip architecture, which was perfectly personified by Jensen Huang's scrambling last-minute arrival.
Yeah.
All while Taiwan watches anxiously from across the strait, fearing their security assurances might just be traded away in the crossfire.
Exactly. And we wrapped up with the strategic deployment of the Temple of Heaven, proving that sometimes the most effective geopolitical weapon is just an incredibly exclusive, personalized walking tour.
Yeah.
This summit is actively rewriting the rules of global commerce and security. And the fallout from these specific meetings will cascade through the supply chains of almost every major industry.
It absolutely will. Which really leaves us with a critical trend to monitor going forward.
What's that?
Well, we focused heavily today on the mechanics of the negotiations, the bureaucratic loopholes, and the soft power. But let's look back at the most glaring diagnostic from that arrival ceremony.
The delegation size.
Right. The U.S. business delegation plummeted from 29 leaders down to just 16.
Yeah, that's a huge drop.
It is. And even with the grand tours and the carefully managed photo ops, we really have to ask, does that shrinking room of CEOs reveal the actual trajectory here?
Right.
Is this a signal that despite the smiles, the handshakes, and the bespoke diplomacy, the irreversible economic uncoupling of the world's two largest superpowers is already locked in?
That is a phenomenal question. Because if the architects of the global economy are quietly leaving the room, you really have to wonder what kind of structure is actually being built in their absence.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.